Hi, Anna. Hi, Clara.
Morning.
Morning.
How are you?
Good, and you?
We are recording already.
For that introduction, and I'll just very briefly introduce the session today, which focuses on tourism in the transfrontier conservation areas of Southern Africa. And we had a very good lift for the work that we do by having it incorporated in the SADC tourism program as goal 3, where there's a specific articulation around the work of tourism in our transfrontier conservation areas in that 10-year framework for the region. So we will be focusing the session for the next hour and a half with inputs from 3 colleagues that have been very active in various components of the transfrontier conservation area landscape in Southern Africa. And I'll start by giving a short introduction to Mr. Moganedi Ntana, who is dialing in from Botswana. And Moganedi has been with Botswana Tourism Organization for 8 years. We worked very closely together while he was the chair of the Kavango Zambezi Tourism and Communications Working Group. And he has subsequently moved to another region in Botswana, specifically the Bobirwa and Celebi-Pikwe region, and one of the TFCAs that he now has in his region is the Greater Mapungubwe Transfrontier Conservation Area. So I'd like to welcome then Moganedi to make his presentation. He's been very active across with a number of stakeholders in different countries, the 5 countries that make up the CASA TFCA, and now the 3 countries that make up the Greater Mapungubwe TFCA. So he's very well versed with the various stakeholders in the region. Thank you, Moganedi. Over to you.
Moganedi, just unmute yourself, please.
Okay, let me also share my screen quickly. Okay, as Roland has already introduced myself, I am Mr. Moganedi Ntana. I'm currently the Tourism Development Manager based in the Bobirwa, Celebi-Pikwe area, which are actually a component of the Greater Mapungubwe TFCA. I have been working in the same position within the Chobe region, where I was the former chairperson of the Tourism Working Group within the CASA TFCA. And now currently being this side, I am a member of the Trilateral Technical Committee for the TFCA. I've had the opportunity early this year to attend one of the meetings of the TTC. Basically, this is going to be the outline of my presentation. I'll take you through a brief introduction to TFCAs, and then I'll zoom into the collaborative destination marketing, which is basically a very important component in transboundary tourism development. I will also touch on the culture and community theme, and then look at the CASA TFCA in the context of providing lessons for the Greater Mapungubwe TFCA. And having worked within the CASA TFCA, I believe I'm bringing in some valuable experience within this side of management of the TFCA. Then closing the presentation, I'll just share a bit of the challenges that we experienced in implementing the CASA TFCA and those that I've newly picked now within the GM TFCA. Basically, the context of the TFCA within the SADC region, we look at them as natural resources that straddle the, just a moment. My screen is showing me our Zoom video. Okay, I'm fine now. And also we look at them as in terms of potential to meaningfully contribute to biodiversity conservation and socioeconomic development. They enable wildlife to move.
Can you just go back into PowerPoint mode?
Okay, I've just shifted the videos to be on the other side because they were, okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah.
We also look at TFCA and their role that they play in terms of tourism and also in conserving and maintaining the ecosystems within protected areas. They are basically presenting assets which are the basis for enhancing our visitor experience of tourists. They also have a potential in terms of promotion of regional integration, cooperative or collaborative tourism and rural development. And then we know that many of these TFCAs, are home to quite a number of important World Heritage sites and also important tourism destinations. One would ask, what do TFCA have to offer? The TFCAs, as I have stated earlier, they bring together some of the best and most established natural and wildlife areas in the SADC region. They also, don't just have the conservation value, but they also have a high cultural heritage and the tourism value, high cultural and tourism value, and are in some of the Southern Africa's most marginal rural areas. In terms of leveraging tourism for job creation and rural inclusion, tourism is considered a multifaceted. It cuts across a number of sectors, as we know, and very diverse, which is actually a very good value add when you look at it from the TFCA point of view. Typically, they are low barriers of entry. They also allow for wide participation, including participation of the informal sector. And tourism as a sector, we know it's labor intensive, which is of value in terms of employment creation. When we look at the extent of the tourism value chain, which in this case has been cited in the WTTC report, Economic Impact Report of 2018. It defines the economic contribution of travel and tourism, looking at the direct contribution, the indirect, the induced contribution, and also the total travel and tourism contribution to GDP and to employment of our nations or our partner states. What are source market calling for? They look for experiences in nature of the beaten track that are unique and present opportunities for culture and heritage encounters. These are basically speaking to the culture and community theme that I highlighted earlier on, where we look at the value from the diverse cultures and traditions within these TFCAs. Zooming in now to the CASA TFCA. I believe most of us know that this is the world's largest TFCA, covering an area of about 520,000 square kilometers. It's home to 20 national parks, 85 forest reserves, 22 community conservancies, 11 sanctuaries, and 111 wildlife management areas, some of which are operated or are providing opportunities for private investment from the private sector. With a population of 2.6 million, and most of these in the rural areas within the CASA TFCA, it really calls for the importance of making sure that there is that grassroots impact in terms of the development of the TFCA. As indicated earlier, CASA is also home to Victoria Falls, the Okavango Delta, the Tsodilo Hills, which are World Heritage sites. The CASA TFCA presents a bold commitment of the 5 partner countries, the Angola, Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, which are basically looking at conserving biodiversity at a large scale using the landscape approach, and also the importance of marketing this biodiversity in a collaborative way. The primary purpose is indicated there: to manage shared natural and cultural heritage, and also to harmonize strategies and policies in promoting coordinated transboundary partnerships and investments. To date, there has been some notable successes in the implementation of the CASA TFCA. The development and management structures within the CASA, as outlined in the treaty, have been very functional and are really helping in terms of issues of governance, issues of tourism, looking at the infrastructure, looking at the people and the livelihoods, and land use planning. There has also been development of national integrated plans for all the 5 partner countries. And then later on, CASA instituted the development of a master integrated development plan, which is basically a very important strategic document in harmonizing and bringing together the national IDPs. Through this master IDP, there's also been the identification of wildlife dispersal areas, which are basically wildlife corridors within the CASA space. An example of these are the Kwando River WGA, the Zambezi Chobe, which connects Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Botswana, the Wange Kazuma, which connects Zimbabwe and Chobe, and then the Wange Makadikadi Ngai. These are very interesting migration corridors, which are also very important in development of the transboundary tourism within the region. The piloting of the CASA Univisa is also a very important addition to the tourism development within the CASA TFCA in terms of facilitating ease of movement of tourists within the region. And currently, the piloting has been successfully done between Zimbabwe and Zambia, and the process of rolling out to the other 3 partner states is ongoing. And we hope very soon we'll be able to have that seamless movement within the CASA TFCA. Putting CASA on the map, that's a very interesting example of highlighting some of the interesting tourism attractions. CASA has over 620 attraction sites. And as you can see, all the 5 partner states have got a very important node that can be included in an itinerary of a traveler. In terms of the transboundary tourism development within the CASA, we have as the objective to develop CASA into a premier tourist destination in Africa. And the CASA Tourism Working Group, which has really been very instrumental in the development of the transboundary tourism product, provide expert advice and reports through the CASA structures of the JMC, the COSO, and the ministerial committees on work done in terms of transboundary tourism development. Through the Tourism Working Group, there's been a number of strategic documents or interventions that have been made. The transboundary tourism strategy, which is at a draft level, but has moved through the structures and will be just awaiting approval, and then implementation will continue. But there are, at the moment, a number of transboundary tourism products and activities, which I will talk about in a minute, which show that in terms of work in progress, there are a number of potential transboundary tourism products that can really be developed within the TFCA. There's also the CASA brand and logo guidelines that has been developed, which is actually also a very good lesson that the TFCA can borrow from. And this is a document that provides kind of a guide in terms of the use of the logo and the brand. We also have what we call the Transboundary Tourism Product Evaluation Framework, which is basically an instrument or a document that guides the Tourism Working Group in consideration of applications that are coming in either from the private sector or those initiated within the TFCA itself or the CASA Tourism Working Group. There is also a consultancy, on the packaging of tourism offerings within the CASA TFCA. This is very key and very important, and I believe other TFCAs can also make use of this type of approach or model. This project is being done with support from SADC GIZ TUPNR program, where it looks at compilation and clustering tourism attractions, basically to increase the tourism appeal of the CASA TFCA. The examples, I think I can start by sharing with you that in 2019, CASA was, able to host the Land Rover Germany experience tour. This is basically a tour that looks into the marketing and gaining leverage from the PR coverage of the Land Rover Experience Tour. It happens in a number of regions, a number of countries annually, but in 2019, we were happy to host them within the CASA TFCA. The Land Rover Germany also have a program which they call Land Rover Travel Program, which is basically, offering exclusive travel experience within Botswana and Namibia. And the Land Rover Germany are now looking at also extending this program to cover the other 3 partner countries. And this will really help in terms of promoting the CASA TFCA. We also have on the table proposals from BirdLife South Africa, which has been developed in collaboration with BirdLife Botswana, BirdLife Zimbabwe, and Birdwatch in Zambia, looking at developing a great CASA bedding route. This is a route that purposefully will be promoting the region's bedding assets, including the bedsides, looking at the looking at the capacity building of community bed guides, looking at the protection of key biodiversity areas within the CASA. The Chobe Zambezi boat safari. This is also another proposal which is also on the table. This is submitted through the Namibia Wildlife Resort in Namibia. It's basically a cross-border boat safari from Namibia, which includes a short visit to Angola, moving through the Zambezi into Zambia. And in Zambia, there is a plan to have some kind of community upliftment and community development in the form of a community campsite where tourists can, coming through this route, will be able to camp in Zambia within the Himalaya Conservancy and enter Botswana through Kasane, do activities there, and possibly, continue the trip into Vic Falls and probably fly out of the region from that end. It's a way of promoting agritourism within the CASA and also building capacity, on developing this niche tourism product. The Zambezi boat cruise. The CASA Golf Classic, which is also another important activity that was, that is coordinated through Zimbabwe desk office. It's a participation between Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana in terms of golfers. And this is an annual golf ensemble celebrating and showcasing the largest TFCA in the area. It is a very important activity. And as you can see, it does, put a bit of awareness and promote the activities of the TFCA. In terms of collaborative destination marketing, this is where we look at marketing in the context of the region and going beyond the conventional marketing of, individual partner states, carrying out their markets. This is where we promote more complementing one another than competition. And basically, it intends to complement the marketing efforts of the partner states and also helping to diversify the CASA's tourism offering in terms of looking at the diverse natural and the cultural heritage assets that already exist within the CASA TFCA. And with the consultancy that I highlighted earlier, it is basically aimed at identifying, developing, and packaging content related to CASA, and also providing critical information that can be used in terms of, marketing, where this can contribute to the business to business, business to consumer marketing efforts at regional and international trade fairs. The model that is being used is basically a model that also has been used by Association of the Caribbean States, where they were looking at, marketing or presenting the characteristics and benefits of a single country versus multi-country destination marketing. And as you can see in the table, there is, very important advantages of, to the traveler, to the destination, and to the region in terms of, the experience, which is varied, diverse within an itinerary compared to a specific country, destination, or experience. Now, a quick look at the TFCA, which is basically a very important also and a very rich TFCA within the Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe region. It is within the confluence of the Limpopo, Shashe River, and the selection of this was based on the rich biodiversity, the scenic beauty, the cultural importance. During my recent exposure tour within the region, it is actually a very unique, offers very unique landscapes, a unique experience, and very different from what we have within the CASA TFCA. This is made up of a number of protected areas. And on the Botswana side, we have got the Northern Tule Game Reserve, which is a private game reserve, and is very famous for its Tule elephants. It's quite a sizable area, about 70,000 hectares. We also have within South Africa the Baobab Nature Reserve, the Mapumbuke National Park, the Venetia Limpopo Game Reserve, the Vembe Game Reserve. And then on the Zimbabwean side, we have the Halsupi WMA, the Wali within the GRDC, the Maramani WMA, and the Tule Circle Safari area. And what's also interesting is the different land tenures within this protected areas in terms of private, state-owned, and community areas. There are a couple of interesting events that take place within the greater Mapumbuke, which can be dubbed as cross-border products. And the first one is the annual Nedbank Tour de Tule, which is quite a very successful event. It's a 4-day mountain bike tour, a 300-kilometer challenging single trek across ancient elephant trails. It's actually a tour that is done to raise funds for the children in the wilderness, but also promoting the TFCA. Within the CASA, there was actually an initiative to engage the Nedbank Tour de Tule organizers, the wilderness safaris, for some kind of an exchange in terms of ideas and come up with a similar type of product within the CASA region, dubbed the CASA Cruise. We also have the Safari on the Run, which is also an annual cross-border trail run event, covers 90 kilometers over 3 days. And they also work with the Maramani community campsite in terms of engagement or bringing the community theme. In closing, I will highlight the few challenges that I have observed within the two TFCAs. For the TFCA, I think it's very important that the partner states of Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe, push to or expedite to finalize the treaty and get it signed, because it's a very important document in guiding the development and operation of the TFCA. And this also helps in formalizing the structures as we were discussing early this year during the February TTC meeting. In CASA, because the structures are there, what is important now is, to improve in terms of participation, because you can see that this also creates a bit of delays in terms of implementation and, for example, the rolling out of the Univisa. With that, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank the team who are organizing this series, and also say to you all, please stay safe, practice social distancing, keep wearing your masks, and wash your hands regularly. Thank you and have a great day. Thank you, Roland.
Thank you very much, Mokhaneri, for that flyover over two of the fascinating trans-frontier conservation landscapes in Southern Africa, the Khaza TFCA and the Greater Mapungubwe. We'll then move on to getting the input from both Anna Spenceley and Don Scott, and then open the floor for inputs and discussions from those that are participating in today's webinar. So I'd like to then move straight on to introducing Dr. Anna Spenceley to you. Anna is a tourism consultant with over 20 years of international experience. She's currently based in Papua New Guinea and is the chair of the IUCN WCPA Tourism and Protected Area Specialist Group. And she sits on the board of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council and on the independent advisory panel of Travelist. She's a signatory to the Future of Tourism, and Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency. I've also been had the privilege of working very closely with Anna on a number of TFCA related guidelines, tourism guidelines and projects in the last few years, and the most recent project that we worked on together was the study which she will be giving us an overview of. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Anna Spenceley. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roland. And it's great to be working with you and Lisa again too. Let me just see if I can juggle. Okay, can you see my slides or my notes?
Your slides.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you today to share the findings of some survey work that I've been doing on looking at the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on protected area tourism. Initially, there was a global survey. Sorry, the formatting has gone a bit skew with. There was a global survey done on behalf of the EU. And initially this was conducted during April, and then we extended it further specifically for Africa through to the end of June. And most of the African responses that we received were in East and Southern Africa. You can review the preliminary results for Africa as a whole in a World Trade Organization overview report, which I've posted the hyperlink here, and a full policy paper for the continent is in production currently. But what I want to speak about here today is a study, a sort of sub-study that was commissioned by GIZ and Boundless to do an analysis of a portion of that data from the EU study to look at responses from the Great Limpopo Trans-Frontier Conservation Area and also the Khaza TFCA. Before I talk to you about what we were seeing from the results, I want to just provide a bit of context to help understand the results that I'm going to present. It's important to understand that the survey was intended to get an overall understanding about impacts and options, and it was intended at a global level rather than to drill down to any one particular protected area or landscape initially. So this image that I'm showing comes from the start of the questionnaire. So if a respondent indicated that they operated in Khaza or the Great Limpopo, or one of the protected areas that is inside that TFCA at that stage, then it was included within the analysis for one or other TFCA. So it's important to note that some of the operators work in multiple countries and multiple protected areas. So the types of values and impacts that they're describing are not necessarily specific to one or other of the TFCAs. And this also means that you have to take the results as kind of general indications, but they're not necessarily specific to those places. Okay, so just want you to bear that in mind as I go through the data. So let's start with the Great Limpopo TFCA. From the survey, the overall survey, there were 136 respondents who said that they were working in this Trans-Frontier Conservation Area region. Most of the respondents were offering accommodation, followed by tours and activities. And they were often offering more than one of these types of products or services. Most of the respondents were relatively small and had less than 250 employees. And on average, the main source market was international. And I think because of this, it's not surprising, therefore, when we asked about the level of cancellations they had in the first part of the year, there has been a dramatic number of cancellations due to international travel restrictions. And just to bring it to life a bit, aside from graphs, I just wanted to share with you some of the comments that were coming through from people. So respondents were really indicating the scale of these challenges, how they've been affected and how they're having to adapt under these kind of circumstances. So throughout this presentation, I will give you some of these examples of quotes, but to give you an idea, there were 44 pages of these kind of comments coming through from people who participated. So a huge amount of lessons learned to come from that. When people were asked about their local employment specifically, so how many people from the local economies they were employing and how they've been affected, many were on reduced wages or on leave without pay. And the prognosis was that more would be likely to be adversely affected if the crisis continued. From the comments provided by respondents, it's clear that the operations desperately want to support their staff, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to do so, and will continue to be so if the crisis continues. They're looking at the likely change in local procurement on products, on hospitality services and environmental services we looked at. And people predicted that there would be considerable reductions in what they would spend in this financial year compared to the previous financial year. And some of the comments relating to this show how integrated protected area tourism is with local economies and value chains. And there are concerns about wildlife crime associated with people losing their livelihoods from tourism. Operators' immediate concerns, there were many, but those were most frequently indicated as important were financial consequences for staff, cash flow, and the resilience of tourism businesses, plus the health and safety of staff and environmental crime. So that's an overview of the impacts from Great Limpopo. Respondents now to look at CASA. So here, 171 of the respondents to the survey said that they were working in CASA in one or more of the protected areas in it. And similarly to Great Limpopo, most of the respondents were tour operators and accommodation. And again, most of these respondents had fewer than 250 staff. Similarly to Great Limpopo, most of the clients were international. And as you would expect, as a consequence, the level of cancellations had been very high at the start of the year because of international travel restrictions. Now here, looking at the comments from the enterprises, doesn't really show much optimism about what will happen if the situation continues. Again, in CASA, many of the operations have had the bulk of their staff on reduced wages. And they are clearly really trying to support their staff. So some of the respondents are self-funding salaries while they can, but it's clear that they can't continue this indefinitely. For CASA, more of the operators predicted a higher likely reduction in the local spending in this financial year, which obviously have an impact on local economies. And similarly, again, the impact on the local economy is not looking positive because of the lack of procurement that they're able to make locally. Here, the patterns of concerns were similar to Great Limpopo, although food and security of communities was more frequently rated as important than environmental crime, interestingly. So that's what people were saying about the impacts. In terms of, wanted to talk a bit about solutions for the respondents in these TFCAs based on what they were saying and some other ideas. And starting with the Great Limpopo to start. So many of the respondents had already put in measures in place to address COVID-19, and this included offering customers the chance to reschedule particularly. However, many had had temporary closures of their facilities or have had to downscale facilities, and some had had to provide refunds as well. The type of support that they need is overwhelmingly related to financial support, including for workers, and also the need for expert advice and identification of new markets and best practices. Most of the respondents requested, in terms of financial support, under 500,000 US dollars to support themselves through this period. And they were mainly looking for this financial support to be provided by through grants. Here are some other examples of the kind of comments that people were making. For example, saying that they really want to survive their businesses and continue supporting conservation and local people, but really need tourism to come back to do so. Okay, so similarly, looking at the CASA TFCA, the most frequent measure put in place by those operating was to offer customers a chance to reschedule. And the type of support that they needed, again, was dominated by their financial needs. Here, the approximate value of the financial support that they required was less than, for Great Limpopo, of less than 250,000 US dollars. But similarly, they were also looking for grants. And for some of the other comments that came from respondents, again, people warning of the really dire consequences for the tourism sector and for conservation and local people if the crisis continues. So moving forward, Lisa had asked me if I could present on what donor responses were being planned to be to COVID-19. And I have a little information, but not so much at this stage. So people are in a lot of planning and things are not necessarily tangible at the moment, but I can share the things that I'm aware of. So although each country will have its own support measures in place, this is a list of some of the resources that are available or are planned for the future that I'm aware of. So they include grant applications, online appeals that are being developed by conservation areas and by tourism operators, and also some stimulus funds that are in development. And then there are also several technical resources available now and in development, including from the World Bank, the EU, and myself, which you're free to use via these links. And one of these I just want to note is I'm currently revising the draft at the moment, but if you have any inputs you want to provide on visitation to protected areas in amid COVID-19 for a policy paper, please let me know. So with that, I would just really like to thank again the EU and Errata Consortium for help with the financing, the data collection, and GIZ and Boundless, and Roland and Lisa and Netsai, who I see on the call, for the help with CASA and Great Limpopo, and to the many people and organizations that helped in the process in terms of getting the questionnaire ready, distributing it, and also mapping the responses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that great fly through a lot of information. So we'll just let everybody mull over that for the next while. And I'll ask then Don to get ready for his presentation. So Don Scott is the owner of Tandatula Safari Camps in the Timbavati, which is in the South African component of the Great Limpopo TFCA. In a previous life, Don worked in the aerospace engineering industry, but has now been involved in the Timbavati as a game lodge operator since 2001. I've also had the privilege of working very closely with Don over the last few months, specifically on a game lodge survey that was focused on the South African game lodges, and also in the context of work that I'm involved in the development of the Greater Kruger Strategic Development Program. And yeah, I look forward to the slides that Don will be speaking to. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roland. I'm just going to get my slides up on the screen here, and thank you for that introduction. I often find it interesting when people mention my past life, but I also remind myself that I've actually now been longer in the tourism and conservation sector than I was in the years that I was in engineering. So what I'm going to be talking about is looking at the tourism sector of TFCAs in a well, I call it the with COVID-19 world, because we can't guarantee that we're going to be past COVID anytime soon. So rather we need to look at it as whilst we're living with it. The focus is going to be on the Greater Kruger Protected Area as part of the Greater Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area. I'm going to start by trying to give us some context on this to just, you know, I'm assuming that nobody knows what we're talking about, but I think that a lot of you probably do already have some familiarity with the TFCA and the Greater Kruger Network, but I think it's worth just contextualizing where we are, who are our neighboring communities. I'm going to then look at, in a sort of a pre-COVID environment, what is the size and density of tourism operations in that Greater Kruger National Park network, and also the employment and economic contribution that network of protected areas makes. Now, this information, by the way, just a disclaimer right at the beginning, it's not my information. I have taken it from the work of Candice Ebb and her team, as well as Alex Chidakel, who produced papers on this a couple of years ago. So the information that you see, I've extracted from that. The next element that we're going to look at after getting some context is I'm going to go into the results of a game lodge survey that Roland and I did, along with, it turned out with the Inbound Working Group that is working towards motivating the South African government to reintroduce international travel, specifically into the protected areas in what one might call travel bubbles or travel into corona resilient zones, trying to promote the opportunity for tourism even whilst COVID is with us, but that opportunity being available because of the fact that we are very much a well-spaced industry. It's very much outdoors activities, and so it promotes the potential to continue with tourism, even though COVID is still with us. Once we've looked at those results of that survey, which are, you know, quite sobering, I do want to then look at a concept of building back better that Roland always uses. I like that term, and we'll be looking at what work is being done in the Greater Kruger area on developing supply chain linkages between the formal game lodge sector and the perhaps the informal sector within protected area network, but also developing those into more formal sector businesses themselves. And then last of all, Roland asked me to touch on, and I'll probably do this quite briefly, TFCA destination marketing. I think that's more just my comment from a private sector tourism operator. So I'll have a slide on that. And then just some quick challenges and priorities that we are faced with. So let's just get straight into the oh, hang on, my slides don't want to move. There we go. Right. So if we look at the Greater Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area, you can see the map is centered, and I'm going to use my mouse here, the map is centered on the actual private reserves that make up the Greater Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Reserves, I suppose. And then those are supporting communities and areas that go around a much greater area than that. There are 4 nodes in the TFCA Integrated Livelihoods Diversification Strategy that was published recently, and the one that relates to our area of interest is what we call Node 5, which is the Kruger to Canyons node, and that spans 2 provinces, which is the Limpopo and the Mpumalanga provinces. So we're looking at this area here. I'm hoping everyone can see my mouse, but that's basically the area that we're looking at. And of course, we're looking at the protected area network that is sitting in this region, which is part of the Greater Kruger National Park. Right, moving on to the next one. So the what we're looking, what I'm trying to define with this slide is to give some indication of the greater Kruger protected area neighborhood, if you like. So if we look at the Kruger National Park is the green section of this slide, the little blue hatched sections are provincial. Oh dear, somebody's interrupting here. Can I mute that? Okay. Sorry guys, I'm just getting somebody interrupting my chat here. Okay, there we go. Hopefully that's been muted. All right, going back to this. So the Kruger National Park itself is in the green. The provincial reserves, which is Makoya in the north, Letaba Ranch is number 3 there, and then the Manyeleti. And then you've got the private reserves, which make up the associated private nature reserves, which is Baluli, Klasiri, Timbavati, and Thornybush here in red. And got right at the bottom, Jajan. So this is a kind of a public-private mosaic of areas that someone coming in again on. Can everyone just please mute themselves? Thanks. All right. So they form a public-private protected area mosaic, and living within a 50-kilometer boundary of that area, so that is surrounded by that yellow line, are communities running right from the north of the park all the way down to the south. So we're talking, and I've listed them there. I mean, it's just for your interest if you want to look at them afterwards if we share these slides. You know, from Toyando all the way down south, but we're talking about 20 million people living within the local area boundary within 50 kilometers of the greater Kruger National Park. So that's a fairly significant population there as well. Then just some points there that Roland asked me to add here is, so we're at the private reserves that the Timbavati forms part of. So the Timbavati is part of node 7.1, and that is part of the APNR reserves. And we are, as I said before, we form part of the greater Kruger open system. And I'll refer to that name quite frequently. The strategic objectives that Roland asked me just to reflect on here is obviously to secure natural capital, and the next one would be increase employment and sustaining livelihoods. Integrating land use planning, that's very, very important in that nobody goes off as an island doing their own thing, but rather that we all work towards a common goal. Supporting partnerships and governance structures, mobilizing resources and optimizing investments, and then of course strengthening data and knowledge management through the network and the communications that we have as part of this strategic development framework. Okay. Let me just move to the next slide. Okay, so now I'm just going to go through some context in terms of the tourism density of the reserve, the employment, and the economic contribution that the Greater Kruger Protected Area has been making prior to COVID hitting us. So I've broken it down into 3 things. We've got the Kruger National Park itself, we've got the provincial reserves and contractual parks, and then we've got the private reserves. And because the private concessions, I've broken that down into which of the camps are of what we would consider to be private lodges. Sandbox is looking at 23 camps, 4,243 beds. The private lodges in Sandbox in the Kruger National Park is 10 camps with 274 beds. Contractual parks, again, private lodges as concessions within those 10 camps, 276 beds, whilst the MTPA operates 1 camp with 128 beds. And then within the private reserves, and you know, the red dots are quite important when you look at this. That gives you an indication of versus the density of the camps that you have in the Kruger Park, high density in the private reserves. There, obviously, there's no public camps, but there are 245 private lodges with 3,148 beds. Now, clearly here, there's a difference between camp density and bed density between these two regions. So whilst the total number of public camps in this whole network is only 24, it represents 4,371 beds, which is on average about 182 beds per camp. The private reserves and the private camps are a lot more, being 265, but there you only have 3,698 beds, which means that you're looking at an average of only 14 beds per camp. So whilst the public camps are lower in number, they still offer the highest number of beds. So overall, we've got 289 camps with just over 8,000 beds in the whole reserve network. Moving on to the employment structure, I've tried to break it down in the same way because then it's easy to sort of do the comparisons. So sandparks in the Kruger Park itself, 2,243 jobs, the private lodges, 1,163. The provincial reserves and contractual parks, MTPA employing about and Makuleki, by the way. So MTPA is then in this, the Manileti area, and Makuleki is this area right up at the north, if you can see my mouse. So MTPA Makuleki with 213, and the private lodges in those reserves employing 170. And then within the private reserves, I've broken that down into those jobs that are related to reserve management. So each of the reserves has its own protected area management authority, and rather than referring to those as public jobs, but those are still within the private network, but they are actually associated with the management of those reserves. And those are 402, and the private lodges are employing just under 5,000. So total jobs there, 9,188 in total. And I've put in brackets the induced jobs, which is 22,300, which is related to jobs in the supply chain, as well as induced jobs due to people having spending power to be able to fund other businesses. In terms of our economy, the total contribution to GDP of the Greater Kruger Network is 6.6 billion. This was in the study done by Alex Jadakel and then subsequently with Candice Ebb and her team. That includes multipliers and induced spending. The direct contribution to GDP is just under 2.6 billion, with 60% of that direct spend happening within 50 kilometers of the Greater Kruger National Park. If you look at purely the private lodges, you're looking at 70% of that spend is within 50 kilometers of the Greater Kruger National Park. Total tax revenue, 1.5 billion. Total direct wages, 1.16 billion, of which nearly 800 million is in the local area. As I said before, total induced jobs, 22,300. Average salary, interestingly, 112,000 per annum, and that is on average double the average salary of other members of the local communities. So what I'm saying with all of this is that there's a significant contribution to the local area and a significant economic contribution to the local area being made by the Greater Kruger network of reserves. There are limitations, and I'll touch on that when we get when I get further into the talk here. Right, so just having had that context, we then performed a game lodge survey, and as I said, this was in support of the Inbound Working Group and their efforts to motivate government to open up the sector and to allow for initially interprovincial travel and then international travel. So far, we have thankfully had the interprovincial travel boundaries opened, and we will continue working to safely open the international travel as soon as we possibly can. But as we said, the game lodges do make a big contribution to the viability of the protected area landscapes and to local communities through their concession fees, conservation levies, park fees, all of that sort of thing, as well as direct investments in what we wanted to do is we wanted to understand what is the liquidity requirements for game lodges in the South African context over the next 12 to 18 months. We wanted to assess the community and conservation environmental to then support the inbound tourism recovery strategy with some data on this. So going into the results of the survey, 496 individual lodges. Some of those operate under single brands, but a lot of them, they'll have numerous lodges under, umbrellaed under a brand. So 496 individual entries. There's the breakdown on the left of the percentage per province, and you'll see that the bulk of them are in Mpumalanga and Limpopo. And very interestingly, just over 50% of the game lodges in that database are actually located within the Greater Kruger Protected Area Network. So the Greater Kruger represents a significant player in the game lodge sector of South Africa. The first questions that we had in this survey was to say, in your current hibernation state, so this is now in lockdown, unable to operate, no income. There were three main things. What is your monthly cash burn? Just trying to indicate what is the size of the individual companies. What are your breakdown of unavoidable expenses? And then what are your operating capital reserves? This was the most sobering of all, to say how long until you effectively run out of money. So you can see the results of that. The bulk of the lodges are sitting at between 200,000 and 500,000 rand. Okay, sorry, my figures are in rands. 200 and 500,000 rands per month to spend on unavoidable expenses during a period where you have actually zero income. The proportion of unavoidable monthly expenses by area of function, salaries and wages by far the most, and then going down through rental and concession fees, insurances, electricity and fuel, maintenance and other. All of these things are things that we cannot simply switch off in a time of zero income. Then, this was the most sobering of all. It looks that if things do not change and we do not get an opening of the sector and we do not have a change in the behavior of the insurance companies who should be supporting the sector, you could be looking at 85% of the lodges being unable to operate beyond December 2020. Of course, the opening up of the local economy now with interprovincial travel is going to change that. And I think that there's a lot of work being done on the insurance sector to try and get support for the industry, but that is where we are. In terms of what the lodges have been doing to support their socioeconomic activities during this time, okay, measures that we have in place in terms of supporting community projects, increasing local procurement, increasing employment. You can see that most of or at least 50% of the lodges are either doing it already or are considering doing it. And then during the COVID-19 relief period, we have had most of the lodges are actually already involved in doing things like food relief, environmental protection, supporting of staff, and local collaboration. So people are not sitting on their hands. So what are the consolidated economic indicators from the survey? Basically, we've established that there's a direct employment of, this is now in the whole South African context, okay? So not just the Greater Kruger, but the whole South African context. Direct employment of some 19,700 people, of which 16,600 are from local communities. Salaries to local employees in around 1.5 billion rand per annum. Local procurement spend of about 1.2 billion per annum. 33,625 jobs supported, so that includes job multipliers like supply chain and induced. 790 million are being spent on conservation programs and 190 million on community projects. So once again, an indication that the lodge sector out of the tourism spend is contributing fairly significantly. An outlook from the survey is that we will, if things do not change, see a significant drop in the number of game lodges by 2021. That would be associated with significant job losses. And there's an established consolidated liquidity requirement of some 3 billion rand in order to bridge the gap for lodges in this period of shutdown to a point where the tourism activity returns to some semblance of normality. The game lodge sector liquidity requirement within the Greater Kruger National Park itself could be as high as 1.5 billion. So much depends on the revival of domestic travel in South Africa and the return of international tourism. Obviously, the best thing for recovery is to be able to open our doors again. But also on the insurance industry behavior, as this will have a significant impact on the survival of the sector and the insurance sector honouring their business interruption claims in the sector could have a very positive impact on the survival of the game lodge sector. Right, so after all that doom and gloom, we want to rather turn our attention to what has been being done and what is being planned. So as I said, people are not sitting on their hands. We are actually looking at what do we do when things get back to normal, or even during this time when things are quiet, to try and build back better. So I think if you look at the figures that I gave to give context to our employment impact, you can see that employment alone is not going to do the job. 22,300 induced jobs out of 2.9 million represents less than 1% of the total population. And you've already got a situation where those jobs are more than one job per bed, nearly 3 jobs per bed if you look at the induced jobs. So certainly we cannot look to employ the entire community within the game lodge sector. Local procurement at this stage also often focuses on the urban areas such as Nelspruit, Hazyview, Hoedspruit and Palabora. And so one of the elements that we've been looking at quite strongly is the involvement of and the diffusion of the economic spend from the game lodge sector through supply chain linkages into the local community. So this is basically to say, if you are currently buying from a certain supplier, is there possibly a supplier in the local community that could replace that at the same price and quality? And if so, why not rather use those suppliers? And by doing that, disseminating more of the tourism into those communities and bringing ownership models that will actually really increase the beneficiation into the local communities. So we've been looking at how to build these, what I call hyper-localized supply chain linkages. And effectively, we're not doing anything new here. We're actually looking at something very similar to what they've been doing with Madikwe Futures Company. It is looking at establishing a consolidated demand from the formal game lodge businesses. Simply what is being bought, who the current suppliers, and how much are you spending? And then on the other side, looking at establishing an existing network of hyperlocal suppliers from within communities, saying what is being sold and who are your current customers. And then obviously one needs both willing customer and willing supplier. So we create a coalition of the willing by seeing who is willing to engage with each other on this basis, and then to procure, therefore, on a basis of the same quality, reliability, and price parity. And then simply we take that matrix and we cross-reference it to see what are immediate linkages that can be made, what could be done in the medium term to develop businesses that already exist to allow them to supply the formal sector, and then more long-term things such as services that might not exist in those communities at the moment, but that certainly could be developed with education and training to allow those people to then participate in supplying services to the formal game lodge sector at a higher level. Existing resources and models. So like I said before, we've had the Madikwe Futures Company that has already got a well-established system that they have looked at, and we're looking at replicating that in the greater Kruger region as well. And we already have some resources that are doing work on the community side, such as from the region for the region. They are a K2C biosphere program, and they are looking at supplier development in the local communities to help them build their businesses and be able to be viable to supply to the formal sector. And then there's also technology platforms like Money for Jam, which is specifically designed at linking organizations to communities through mobile platforms. So we're looking at ways to integrate those. We've got a proposed pilot project where the lodges of the Timbavati and the Thornybush, as well as the management authorities, are looking at forming a coalition of the willing to engage with the communities of Eikonook, Valferdin, Kluvokani, and Bushbuck Ridge in order to begin working together to create these supply chain linkages. So obviously participation is voluntary from both a private lodge sector and reserve management point of view. Roland, I know I'm going over slightly, but I think Anna finished early, so if you don't mind, I'll just continue. The idea behind a pilot program is that we really want to do something that is easier to manage and give us quicker outcomes so that we can get some runs on the board And then, as I said, the idea is that the model is highly scalable without modification and can then be implemented over the greater Kruger National Park landscape just by replicating it in other areas. And by doing this, we can build a really strong constituency of ownership and benefit sharing in the greater Kruger National Park wildlife economy. Right, that covers the supply chain linkage concept. Roland asked me to touch briefly on GLTFCA marketing from a private sector perspective. So I've just done one quick slide here, and we never actually had an opportunity to discuss this, but GLTFCA is a brand from a point of view of the safari tourism operations in that area. At this stage, is a relatively unknown brand. It's very well known within the conservation space and all of the Greater Kruger Strategic Development Platform and all of that. I think it's a very well-known concept, but to the actual individual operators within the reserve network, quite often they don't know what it is. Greater Kruger National Park, on the other hand, is a very, very well-known brand, and it is used extensively in the marketing of private sector operations. What's happened is that name has grown organically in use, and it has grown with the continued inclusion of private reserves into the Greater Kruger Network mosaic of protected areas. The current use seems to be in name only. There's no, and again, I'm talking from a private sector large operator perspective, not with my hat on in the strategic development platform role, but rather as an individual operator. There's no communicated brand strategy associated with it. There's no real brand collateral messaging used at this stage, and what is being used is simply being used by the private sector individual lodges, and you'll find that in anybody's marketing material. My perspective is that any harnessing of either GLTFCA or Greater Kruger National Park as an overarching brand needs to be done with consultation and buy-in of the private sector, because they are already spending significant marketing spend on pushing out the name of Greater Kruger National Park. And then lastly, challenges and priorities. Clearly from the presentation on the Game Lodge survey, we have a very severe liquidity crisis that needs to be looked at and solved for the next 12 to 18 months. Certainly safely opening the travel sector for operations is critical. Access to funding is critical, but it also represents an opportunity in that there may be the ability to encourage participation in programs such as the supply chain development program that we're talking about, through access to funding through some of the large funding agencies. And then, of course, collaboration and the using of existing networks within the GLTFCA structures to coordinate these efforts for recovery is very, very crucial as well. And that is me. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks Don, and thanks to all the presenters. I think that this has given a lot of food for thought and a lot of fresh insights from three fairly different angles, but all centered on the tourism experience in the TFCAs. Thank you very much to everybody that has also been placing a few comments into the chat box. I think I'm going to just ask a couple of the presenters a few of the questions that have come up. And I wanted to start with Mohanedi around a lot of the focus at the moment has been about targeting local tourism, because the international tourism will take some time to bounce back, and obviously because of the closure of the international borders and the aspects related to that. So I just wanted to hear from you, Mohanedi, in the context of Botswana and your experience both in Kasane and also Silibi Pikwe now.
I lost Roland. Did anybody else lose Roland?
Yes.
Yeah, I've also lost him.
Okay, then I think the question was clear, right, Mohanedi? If you can just maybe highlight a bit more with regard to how to improve then local and regional tourism as an intermediate influx of tourism, and also I think future with regard, instead of the international tourism that we currently rely on.
Yeah, I think it's really very important to note that during this COVID pandemic, the travel restrictions have really closed out our international markets. But I think at the moment it's really important for partner states to at least zoom in for now for the local market, and also look into the region, probably in the short, medium term. For Botswana, for example, we have just put out what we call the Rediscover Botswana initiative, which is basically an 8,000 kilometer exposure tour, which we are doing around the country. And it's really working very well, because it's putting out there very interesting destinations within the country, which our local market can see and tap into and start learning about the products that are offered around the country. And I think it's important also within the SADC region and within the TFCA in the region that, at a time such as this one, when we're ready to the gradual opening of our borders, it is important to probably relook at our strategies and focus on the domestic and regional markets. But another important side, which I've seen, being omitted in a number of strategies, is the disaster management component within our strategies. It's very important that when pandemics such as these occur, we must have within both our national tourism strategies and transboundary tourism strategies a component on how to deal with such, and also prepare for the gradual opening in cases where travel restrictions are imposed. Thanks, Roland.
Thanks. I'm back again, Lisa.
Yeah.
Don, can you also give a perspective from the Greater Kruger side? What is your approach and other players in the game lodge sector in the Greater Kruger?
Sorry, just had to unmute it. Just repeat it to me again, because I lost you just at the time when you were actually voicing the question.
My question was, the approach that the game lodges would be taking to attract domestic tourism in the coming months. What is that looking like for your operation and for other game lodges in the Greater Kruger?
Okay, so just to clarify, and I think that there was a question that I saw here on the chat asking about that specifically, and very definitely everybody is most definitely trying to reignite tourism by focusing on what is available to us immediately. So the moment that that government has said that we can actually get tourism across, in fact, we've been operational for what in South African context for intra-provincial travel, so that means travel within your own province, already for a few weeks. And I can tell you that already all of the reserves have seen activity. And it's as a result of the lodges within those reserves specifically introducing rates to reignite the tourism sector. So it's a case of recognizing and embracing the fact that at this stage, we will only have domestic tourism available to us, and we will certainly act in such a way as to encourage and to facilitate domestic tourism as long as there's no international tourism coming to the area. In fact, there's a couple of places, us being one of them, that have introduced new camps specifically to cater for, in our case, for the South African market, that are, exclusive use and cater to that, to the kind of travel that I myself, even though I'm a lodge owner, I love to go to the Kruger and I love to do, my own catering and so on. So there's people who are introducing self-catering camps to offer that. So very definitely there is there's movement, and the lodges are responding by offering rates that South Africans will definitely find very attractive, and will move to to getting some tourism going whilst the international borders are still closed.
I think we lost Roland again.
Okay. I'll go back in.
Okay.
There were also actually some questions with regard to how much of the funding of tourism revenue is actually ending up at conservation level. Maybe Anna, from your survey, what are sort of the main comments with regard to that, and also, yeah, how much will eventually be threatened with regard to the loss of tourism revenue, how it will influence the conservation funding as well?
Well, like I mentioned for the study that that I shared, it's difficult to drill down for any one particular area agency what the changes in revenue will be from that survey, because operators were responding collectively if they had multiple lodges in different protected areas in different parks. So I actually think the data that Don shared is probably a bit more, he's probably going to be able to answer that question a bit better. But I did just want to touch on the previous question, if I may, about the domestic tourism, and just come back to that. One of the things I've been thinking about in this reopening parks paper for the EU is the whole journey that a tourist is going to be taking from their home through gateway communities, using the transport before they actually get to an accommodation facility or a tour. And that we need to make sure that health and safety protocols are in place so that all the people that the travellers come into contact with are safe from COVID on the way. And I think particularly in rural areas where maybe there are not the same facilities, maybe not everybody has masks, maybe not everybody has the same hand washing opportunities, the water is less available, the danger of the transferring of the disease is higher. So I think we really need to think very carefully about the whole of the experience and make sure that realize that we have a duty of care to everyone that people meet on their way. Thank you.
Great. Anna, just coming back to you also, one of the questions that was posted was if the biodiversity impact has been measured at all, and also generally how much conservation revenue, is there a rule of thumb as to how much conservation revenue actually is derived from the tourism revenues in various conservation landscapes?
Okay, on the biodiversity question, it's funny, we were discussing this yesterday actually. There have been a whole range of reports, particularly on charismatic wildlife, on levels of poaching. In some places where it's going up, in some levels where it's going down, incidents of rhino poaching. There were reports in South Africa, for example, where rhino poaching was going down. And this was thought to be because of the lockdown and because poachers weren't able to get to where the rhinos were and then move the horn around, which was kind of interesting. But I don't think there's been any kind of systematic surveys yet, really looking at what the before and after for biodiversity in general, if you're looking at all of biodiversity, not just, animals that are people hunting, looking at all of the flora and fauna and what are the impacts being, and whether the lockdowns and the lack of people being able to move is affecting those. And we've seen globally that wildlife is moving back into spaces that has been vacated by people and by tourists. And it makes me question whether we've even got our parameters for sustainable tourism right. In places that we thought were managed well, wildlife is coming back and thriving and saying, hey, we're here now. So I think more research is needed, and that it's going to be difficult to do until people can get out to the field to really monitor what the changes have been. In terms of what the impacts have been on conservation budgets, again, it doesn't really come through clearly from the amalgamated data, but I can see from some of the individual responses from particular protected areas and conservancies across Africa that have been responding is that the lack of tourism revenues is hitting their conservation budgets. Some conservation areas are giving discounts to to concessionaires and license holders so that their lease fees are lower during this crisis period. But it'll really depend on a protected area to protected area basis, how much they rely on tourism and how diversified their income streams are. And if nothing else, this has shown that diversification is something that's going to save protected areas and their financing, and also tourism operators. So some tourism operators, globally speaking, who have an agritourism component are able to use that. So if they are they're selling coffee, or they are selling some kind of other produce to different kinds of markets that aren't so affected by COVID, then that's really helping them. So I think it's really nice. It's a good time to be creative and think about how we can not put ourselves in this situation. And again, if it takes place, how do we make things more resilient? And as you say, Roland and Don, build back better.
Mokganedi, a question to you around what were the key learnings that you've been able to bring to the Greater Mapungubwe TFCA that you've picked up from your time in Kasane working in the Kaza TFCA?
Mokganedi, you have to just unmute yourself.
All right, thanks for the question, Roland. There's quite a number of lessons that one can, bring to the table in terms of the operationalization of the GM TFCA. Within Kaza, we had already, moved towards the development of the transboundary tourism products, and actually have implemented quite a number of concepts. For example, the Tshwane Bikers Club, the recently concluded Land Rover experience. And I think most of the lessons, centers around the operations, intergovernmental collaborations, communications, the readiness within our ports of entry, the challenges in terms of, the speed or in terms of how we process, the movement of tourists across borders, because you'll find that in a number of areas, there's some inconsistencies, and in some ports of entries, you'll take more time or you pay more than in other areas. And I think those are some of the things that when one plans a transboundary or cross-border itinerary, you look at, those kind of issues, and also work on harmonizing strategies and action plans in terms of collaborative marketing. I think those are some of the things, but also I think, with the signing of the treaty, I think GMTFCA will benefit in terms of having a more formalized way of managing the structures that govern the TFCA. So there's quite a lot of lessons which I think the GMTFCA would learn from the implementation of the Kaza TFCA.
Thanks. Don, a very quick question to you. You championing this work with your peers, the game lodge owners and operators, around increasing local supply chain development. What's the uptake likely to be? Is there appetite? What's your approach to convincing more to create this consolidated demand and to really try and crack this?
Yeah, thanks, Roland. So, like I said in the talk, it has to be a coalition of the willing. You can't force people through that door. And so, the first thing, and I think I've mentioned that on one of the slides, is if one can say to your peers in this situation, if we can provide the same service at the same level of quality, the same reliability, and for the same price, why should you not be agnostic about where you're buying it from, and rather, support a hyper-local supplier than somebody further afield? And that's the approach that I'm taking to talking to my colleagues for the pilot study, is to work on that approach first, and to say, okay, so we're not going to try and choose 100 products and services where we're not sure that the businesses who are offering those can sustain, particularly the reliability side of it. So we choose low-hanging fruit, businesses that are already doing really and can apply at the levelability and with price parity. And then once we've got those under the belt, that's getting runs on the board, and then we can say, okay, well, now that you see that this is working, let's take it to the next step and expand it out. And also realizing that it's not all going to be low-hanging fruit. We cannot expect that you're just going to walk in and get a bunch of businesses that can perform at the same level as some of the larger formal businesses from the urban areas. There is going to need to be a long-term commitment towards mentoring, assisting, and putting people in touch with networks that can assist them to develop their businesses to in fact grow from being informal to actual formal sector businesses. So that's the approach that we're taking.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Don. We pretty much at the end of our time. I want to make a quick comment on a question that Tribute posed around plans to explore other activities on the same scale as tourism activities in these conservation landscapes for employment creation and sustained livelihoods. And I'm aware of work that our minister is championing as chair of the African Ministers of the Environment around the development of an African green stimulus program, which is looking at conservation compatible and green economy compatible activities across the continent. So there would be probably very interesting work emerging from that program. I think that we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much for all the comments that have come through. There are a couple linked to the supply chain development, which we'll follow up on. There were also a couple that were centered around the Gulf situation. There's a whole lot of work that needs to be done in that space, and we'll certainly be drilling into a few more of these issues as we develop our work further. So I'd like to hand over back to Lisa to wrap up the session. And thank you very much again for my panelists.
Yeah, thanks very much all, also for your time and that you've put into the presentations. It's all voluntary time, and I think we have learned a lot. I'll also post the website again where the presentations can be downloaded, and you can also look at the recordings, because I think it was quite some information to digest for everyone. On Thursday, we will have another session on tourism, which will be from 1:30 till 2:30, where Netsai Bolman, as tourism advisor at my office at GIZ, will moderate a discussion with various CEOs of tourism boards, as well as an inbound and an outbound operator working in CASA. So they will basically dive a bit more into detail into the multi-destination marketing that CASA is embarking on. So we hope that you tune in then. And also next week, funding opportunities will be a main discussion. So if you want to learn more about what funding opportunities there are on Tuesday, we will dive more into the TFCA financing facility and also present on various funding opportunities. But yeah, you can find everything as usual on the TFCA portal. I would like to thank all again, and please put your video on briefly so that we can see you. You can wave. Oh, I put my video off. Wave goodbye to all the presenters. It's nice to see you. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Lisa,
Bye all, thanks.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Great discussion.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.